You want to know one of the coldest truths hiding underneath Goodfellas? Tommy does not just die because he is violent. He does not just die because he is reckless. And he does not even die only because he killed Billy Batts. Tommy dies because one day the man protecting him decides he is no longer worth protecting. That is the part the movie leaves in the shadows. Because when Tommy walks into that room, thinking he is about to be made, the real murder has already happened long before the gun comes out. The real murder happens the moment Paul Vario, his boss, his protector, the man who had backed him for years, quietly decides to stop saying no. That is what people miss. They hear the word snitch, and they think of a wire, court transcript, a guy whispering to the FBI, but that is not what happened here. Paul Vario did not go downtown with a statement. He did not flip, he did not testify. He did something much more mob-like, much more elegant, and much more ruthless. He withdrew protection. And in that world, withdrawing protection can be more deadly than pulling the trigger yourself. Because once your own captain stops standing in the way, the men who have been waiting for you finally get their chance. That is what this story is really about. Not just the death of Tommy DeSimone, but the moment mob politics finally became more important than personal loyalty. The moment a boss looked at one of his own men and decided that peace with another family mattered more than the life standing right in front of him. And the reason this matters so much is because Goodfellas shows you the explosion, but it never fully shows you the accounting. It shows you Tommy as the wild man, the dangerous one, the guy always one insult away from murder. It shows you his end. But it does not fully explain why Paul Vario, the real man behind Paulie Cicero, would protect Tommy for years and then suddenly let him go. So let's get into that. Because once you understand Paul Vario, Tommy's death stops looking like revenge and starts looking like management. And that is much darker. Paul Vario was not a movie gangster in the flashy sense. He was not loud, he was not theatrical, he was not one of those men who needed the room to feel his power every second. What made him dangerous was the opposite. He was controlled, practical, quiet. He understood how to run a profitable crew without turning every week into a war. He made money through gambling, extortion, labor rackets, airport schemes, loan sharking, all the boring, reliable forms of criminal income that do not look cinematic but keep the whole machine alive. That was his real talent. Not just violence, structure. He understood that in the Mafia, surviving was not only about having tough guys around you, it was about balance, relationships, the right amount of fear, the right amount of discipline, the right amount of diplomacy. A smart capo did not just manage criminals, he managed risk. And that is why Tommy was both valuable to him and dangerous to him from the very beginning. Because Tommy was useful, extremely useful. He was big, fearless, brutal, impulsive, and willing to do things most men would hesitate to do. If you needed somebody hurt, Tommy could hurt them. If you needed somebody scared, Tommy could scare them. If you needed something ugly done fast, Tommy was the kind of guy you could point in a direction and let go. Men like that are valuable in organized crime, but only up to a point. Because a weapon is only useful if you can control it. And Tommy was never really under control. That is the key to the whole story. For years, Paul could live with that. He could absorb the headaches. He could smooth over the complaints. He could let Tommy be Tommy because Tommy was still helping the crew, still earning, still intimidating the right people, still functioning as a piece of Paul's operation. But every year, Tommy also became more expensive. More heat, more ego, more incidents, more people who had reason to hate him. And eventually you reach a moment in a criminal organization where a man stops being an asset with flaws and becomes a liability with a resume. That is what Tommy turns into. Now, Billy Batts is the obvious turning point, but to really understand why Paul eventually gives him up, you have to understand the weight of that murder in mob terms. Billy Batts was not just another guy in a bar. He was a made man in the Gambino family. That means he was protected by the structure itself. Not morally protected, institutionally protected. Killing a made man without authorization is not some local neighborhood problem. It is a political offense. It is the kind of thing that creates tension between families. And when tension starts moving between families, people much more powerful than Tommy start paying attention. That is why Billy Batts mattered so much. Not just because Tommy killed him, because Tommy killed someone the system could not afford to ignore forever. Now, at first, it seems like Tommy gets away with it. That is the part people often find confusing. If killing a made guy is such a massive violation, why does Tommy keep breathing for years afterward? Because the Mafia does not always settle its debts immediately. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it measures. Sometimes it asks whether revenge is worth the instability it creates. And in Billy Batts' case, there were reasons not to blow everything up right away. Billy had been in prison, the world had moved on, bigger issues were floating around New York. The Gambinos may have wanted justice, but wanting justice and starting a serious conflict are not always the same thing. So Tommy survives at first, and that survival probably fools him into thinking Paul's protection is permanent. That is the real trap, because once a man is protected long enough, he starts mistaking tolerance for loyalty. Tommy likely believed that as long as he earned, as long as he stayed close to the right people, as long as Paul still let him operate, the worst was behind him. He probably believed Billy Batts had become just another ugly chapter. But that is not how these things disappear. In the Mafia, debts do not always vanish. Sometimes they sit quietly, gathering interest. And Tommy kept adding to the bill. That is the part that matters. Billy Batts was not the only problem. Billy Batts was the biggest one, but not the only one. Tommy had the kind of personality that created enemies faster than most men create excuses. He was hot-headed, disrespectful, impossible to predict, and incapable of leaving an insult alone. Every outburst made him less defendable. Every reckless act made it harder for Paul to justify him. Every unnecessary act of violence made Paul's crew look less disciplined and more unstable. And then there is the other Gambino-related killing often associated with Tommy in real life, the murder of Ronald Foxy Jerethy. That matters because at that point, Tommy is no longer just the guy who once made a terrible mistake with Billy Batts. He is becoming a pattern. He is becoming the guy who keeps colliding with people he absolutely should not be colliding with. Once that happens, the question changes. It is no longer, can Paul protect him? The question becomes, how many times can Paul afford to protect him? That is the moment a boss starts doing the real math. And Paul Vario, more than anything else, was a man who did math. Not school math, mob math. One man versus interfamily peace. One associate versus millions in revenue. One reckless soldier versus long-term stability. One personal loyalty versus the much bigger obligation of keeping the whole structure standing. That is the calculation Tommy loses. Because Tommy is not a made man. That matters more than almost anything. He is useful, yes. Dangerous, yes. Productive in his own chaotic way, yes. But he is still an associate. Still replaceable in the eyes of the larger system. He can kill, he can earn, he can frighten, but he cannot become sacred. That gives Paul room to let him go. And this is where the word snitched becomes interesting, because what Paul does is not snitching in the civilian sense. In the civilian world, betrayal means telling on somebody, handing them over, naming names, providing evidence. But in the Mafia, betrayal can be quieter than that. Sometimes betrayal is simply choosing not to block the door anymore. That is what Paul does. He does not need to personally hand Tommy to the Gambinos. He does not need to stand in a room and say, take him. He just has to stop insisting that Tommy is under his umbrella. He has to stop making Tommy untouchable. He has to let the right people understand that if something happens, there will be no retaliation from his side. That is enough. That is the signal. That is the green light without having to say the words. And that is why it is so cold. Because Paul gets the benefits of the decision without the dirt of the act. He keeps peace. He avoids war. He satisfies a legitimate grievance. He preserves relationships with another family. And he can still tell himself in some twisted mob way that he did not kill Tommy. He just stopped saving him. But come on, in a world like that, there is not much difference. And what makes it even darker is the timing. Tommy is not dragged out in chains. He is not warned. He is not disciplined in some visible way. He is lured by the thing he wanted most: recognition, status, respect. The one thing he could never fully secure through fear alone. He is told he is being made. He is led into a room expecting honor, and instead, he finds emptiness. That is not just murder. That is judgment. It is the system using Tommy's own hunger against him. And if you think about Paul's role in that, it becomes almost unbearable. Because Tommy probably goes into that situation believing the machine still works for him, believing his people still have his back, believing all the years of service, all the money, all the violence, all the loyalty, all the ugly work he did for others still mean something. And the truth is, they do mean something. They mean he was useful until he wasn't. That is the lesson. Paul did not betray Tommy in spite of the years Tommy gave him. Paul betrayed Tommy because, after all those years, Tommy's usefulness no longer outweighed the cost of keeping him alive. And once you understand that, Paul Vario stops looking like a warm, old-school mob father figure and starts looking like what he really was: a manager of criminal interests, a businessman, a strategist, a man willing to tolerate all kinds of chaos until the chaos threatened the business itself. Then the chaos had to go. Now, here is the part that makes the whole thing even more fascinating. Paul was probably right. Strategically, coldly, ruthlessly right. That is the hardest truth in the whole story. Because if you step outside emotion for a second and look at it from the perspective of a capo responsible for men, money, relationships, and survival, what was the alternative? Start a conflict with the Gambinos over one unstable associate? Risk broader consequences for a man who kept creating new problems? Tie the fate of the whole crew to the life of somebody who could not control his mouth, his temper, or his violence? That would have been madness. Paul chose the family over the individual. He chose structure over sentiment. He chose peace over personal loyalty. In mob logic, that is not cowardice. That is leadership. Ugly leadership, but leadership. And yet, even if he was right strategically, that does not make it any less destructive morally. Because once the men around him see what happened, once Henry sees it, once Jimmy sees it, once the lesson settles in, something important dies in the crew beyond Tommy himself, the illusion dies. The illusion that loyalty protects you. The illusion that years of service build a shield. The illusion that if you do enough dirty work for the right people, they will stand beside you when the bill comes due. Paul destroys that illusion, and that may matter more than he realizes, because men like Henry Hill are always watching, always learning, always storing away little truths about how the system really works. And what does Henry see in Tommy's death? He sees that when things get serious, the organization will sacrifice you if it has to. He sees that being close to power is not the same as being safe. He sees that all the family talk has limits. That kind of lesson stays with a man. So when Henry eventually flips, when he decides that survival matters more than loyalty, you have to wonder how much of that mentality was shaped by watching what happened to Tommy. Watching a man who had spilled blood for the crew get cast aside when he became too expensive. Watching a boss make the practical choice instead of the faithful one. Because once you know that, staying loyal becomes a much harder sell. That is why this story matters. It is not just about one murder in Queens. It is about what the murder reveals. It reveals that the Mafia is not built on honor the way it likes to advertise. It is built on conditional loyalty. Loyalty while profitable. Loyalty while convenient. Loyalty until it threatens something bigger. Then it ends. That is the real system. Paul Vario understood that system perfectly. Tommy did not. Tommy thought usefulness guaranteed protection. He thought violence created security. He thought being feared made him solid. But fear is not the same thing as institutional value. And being useful is not the same thing as being permanent. Every murder Tommy committed created a debt somewhere. Every reckless act narrowed the number of men willing to keep covering for him. Every time Paul saved him, Paul was really just postponing a larger decision. Until one day, postponement became more dangerous than surrender. And that is when Tommy was dead, whether he knew it yet or not. So when people say Goodfellas never showed why Paul Vario snitched on Tommy DeSimone, that is exactly right. The movie shows the symptom. The movie shows the explosion. But the deeper truth is quieter. Paul did not snitch in the ordinary sense. He did something colder. He let Tommy believe protection still existed after he had already decided deep down that one day it wouldn't. He let Tommy keep operating under the illusion that his place in the crew meant safety. He let him go on earning, stealing, bullying, killing, and imagining that loyalty still had substance. And when the long-delayed bill finally arrived, Paul did not fight it. He did not argue. He did not throw the crew into chaos to save him. He stepped aside. That is the betrayal. Not the gunshot itself, the silence before it, the years of apparent backing that ended the moment the politics changed. And that is why Tommy's death hits so hard. Not only because he gets tricked, not only because he dies young, but because his end exposes the entire fraud beneath the Mafia's favorite word, family. Because in the end, Paul Vario chose the real family, not Tommy, the organization.